Alright, thank you for clicking on this video, and today what I'm going to share with you is this Medium article called New Tools for Flutter Developers Built in Flutter. That's written by Philip and Chris. So they have rebuilt the Dart DevTools from scratch in Flutter Web, which is pretty good. So if you were to read the article itself, they basically talk what Flutter is and what it has inside the VS Code and such. But let's drag all the way down to DevTools. So inside this DevTools section, it talks about DevTools. And if you were to go to the second paragraph, you could see that they have launched their DevTools in Flutter, I guess a little this week or last week, I'm not too sure. Then they were previously written in Dart, but not using the Flutter framework. So what framework uses Dart but is able to create websites? So there is this framework which is called Angular Dart, for those who don't know. So before Flutter Web was implemented, people who want to port over to websites, they probably use Angular Dart. So an Angular Dart is basically a framework that uses Dart to build websites. However, it is not very popular, so I don't know whether it's still going to be in production in terms of like usage and such, or it's going to be well supported. So they have, I guess this is just my assumption, they have created DevTools in Angular Dart, but now they have ported to Flutter, and they are able to rewrite from scratch, which is very amazing. And they are able to improve the UI and add completely new features. So the new feature they have added is called Layout Explorer. So what Layout Explorer does is that it explores layout. I am a genius, big brain. Kidding aside, basically you have another tab just beside the details tree, which is called Layout Explorer. And if you were to scroll all the way down, what the Layout Explorer does is that it visualizes all of your components in a layout widget. For example, a row widget is a layout widget, and inside layout widget you can have children widgets. So you could say that widgets that have children are kind of layout widget, but that's not the whole definition about it. And inside this row, you could see the visualization of how much space a flat button and a container in this example uses. So, and what kind of constraints they have. So they have unconstrained height, they have constrained width and height or whatsoever, right? And that's what I'm going to share with you. So let's get started with this Layout Explorer. Alright, so I have an example app which is basically a list of numbers, and then you could see this is a text, and then there is some spacing on top. So if you were to go to the left side of the Dart DevTools, you could see the widget tree, and you could see this line thingy that represents the children of a parent widget. Then you have the details tree tab. If you were to click, for example, on column, it will show you the details. So for example, if I've not used any of these parameters, then I guess it will say D, which is, I don't know, default. But let's go to the Layout Explorer that we are interested. So let's click on Layout Explorer, and you can see all of the different widgets that has been stacked on top of one another. So the first widget you could see is actually a sized box that has a height of 100. I really don't like how it looks like, but that's fine. And then you have your different flags of fit, and in default you have null flags and tight fit, and at the same time you can just scroll all the widgets below. So you could see that this sized box is empty, meaning that it's just a blank space, which I usually use if I want to have a blank space on top of, for example, any widgets I have. So one thing that I want to showcase is this thing. So this looks like a meh emoji, right? Meh face. So this actually is a button that helps you change your main axis alignment without you changing your code. So this will reflect on your Flutter app over here. So for example, if I were to click on this meh face, it will open up this menu that shows all of the main axis alignment properties that you can play around with. So for example, if I were to click at the end, that means our bunch of children widgets will go to the bottom, and you could see that it animates inside our Layout Explorer. And if you were to scroll all the way down, you could see that our widget has pushed all the way to the bottom, which also reflects on the current app itself. So this is really good. This doesn't really change the code of your project. If I were to go back to the Flutter project that I have, it doesn't have any changes in the code, which is good, I think. I think why they don't put like any customization is that we probably would, you know, break the app if we were to have any custom, I guess, editing inside this layout explorer. But this is really pretty cool. So at the same time, you have your usual thing. So you have your repaint rainbow. So if I were to refresh this, you could see that this has made a color boundary around our app, and what it basically does is actually it will repaint the rainbow if anything is being repainted. So that means if there was a widget that rebuilds itself, then this color yellow will turn into another color. So that will show you what kind of UI rebuilds happen inside your app. And then you have your paint baseline. So this is where your text widgets will have its baseline. I don't really know, but debug pane is pretty good. So what debug pane does is it shows you the different box constraints of your different widgets. So for example, for an iPhone usually have a left side kind of constraint. So basically this is to detect any like scroll back to the previous app. I would recommend you to have your text just before this thing so it doesn't disrupt any user experience, right? And at the same time you have this widgets that is size the box, so it doesn't take up any space at all. So size box is pretty awesome. I really like it. And then lastly you have slow animations, which enable slow animations. That's about it. And let's look through all of the different tabs on top over here. So I'm going to go from right to left, right? So you have logging, right? So this is where all of your different logging, for example, your different UIs, how long it renders and such. So if I were to refresh this, you have your different hot reload kind of messages you can see over here. So Flutter frame, it takes around 2 seconds or 2 seconds to render, and then there's another rebuild. So around 37 milliseconds to render. So yeah, you have some logging feature inside the .devtools. Next we go to network. So what basically it does, it records what HTTP or network calls that you have. So for example, if you were to call an API, so whether it is going to give a JSON object or whatever, right? So this will show you how long it will take and such. Next we have the debugger, which is pretty cool. So basically like inside your VS Code, it looks very similar. You have an IDE, and at the left you could see that you can put in some breakpoints that you can do. So I haven't really played around this, but this is pretty cool. So I guess this is like a deep dive of what the actual code does or how it reflects what data and such. So I think this is pretty cool here, and it makes more sense rather than if you were to go to VS Code and like really think about what are the different buttons say. So yeah, that's pretty cool. Then next thing is we have performance, memory, and timeline, right? So I'm not going to delve into so much on that. You know what performance does? It tracks your performance, and the only way for you to do this, because there's an error sign, is to make your mode into a profile mode. So generally there's 3 modes in Flutter. You have debug, profile, and production. So profile is the in between. Profile checks your performance, so it uses, I guess, if I'm not wrong, the production kind of rendering engine rather than the virtual machine that debug has. And then at the same time you can do some performance kind of tracking. So timeline is the same. So memory for itself, I'm not too sure, but I guess this will be release mode. Sorry, it's not production mode, it's release mode. I get confused with those two. So that's basically it about this Dart Dev Tools. So I'm really happy that the Dart team or the Flutter team has recreated this into a Flutter Web project, because you know it builds more confidence to the users who are using Flutter Web as, I guess, their future go-to thing, right? They have explained like in very short forms like, timeline view show build times for each frame as a flame chart, and makes it easy to identify problematic frames while seeing them in context, right? So you see whether which thing is rendering a lot more than usual. And then memory shows you how much your app uses. So for example, if you have a lot of animations, will it take out a lot of RAM and such? And then performance, it tells you the CPU of how it takes. So there's a lot of things that it's doing in the CPU side in terms of performance. And then DevTools has its own debugger. If you're not using an IDE for development, you can put in breakpoints, and you could see all like the different variables and like stuff here, right? And yeah, that's pretty cool. So you have your network sessions. You could see like, so for example, you have an example, and then you see what are the status and the duration for it to, you know, get data from the URI and when it has happened. So yep, this is pretty cool if you have a lot of network calls. And lastly, you have like debugger, so you might have some print statement that you use and Flutter frames that you have gone through when you're developing. So DevTools can be used for mobile apps, desktop apps, and web apps. But for web apps, I've already tried. Some of the features on top over here is not enabled for web yet, but you can generally use that DevTools. Why I'm whispering? Because I really don't want to shout. Alright. Now, this is a very good thing because rewriting DevTools in Flutter has many benefits. I would definitely say yes, increase productivity, walking in the shoes of our customers, which is very good because sometimes when we create a product, we are so blindsided in terms of like what we think is important. But when we actually do it, then it's like, oh, okay, now we know how it actually feels to create a Flutter web. So let's give a round of applause for the Flutter web team, or the Flutter team, or the Dart team, doesn't matter, and the freedom of choice of target platforms. So you can use the Dart DevTools in mobile, desktop, and web apps. And one thing they haven't mentioned is rebuilding DevTools invites community to contribute more easily, because a lot of us don't know Angular Dart, let's be honest. And the thing is that now it's open source. You can definitely contribute to this open source library, which I recommend you to do. So that's about it. I'm really happy on how this Dart DevTools is going about. Yeah, I guess it gives confidence on people like, hey, so this is like production ready kindish. But for me personally, I still would not use Flutter Web for any production level kind of like heavy app. Why is that so? Which I'm going to show you right now. So there was a previous app that was shown inside the Flutter Web Support Updates Medium article created by Mariam, and they showcased this website called Amster. So Amster is basically a no-code tool for building better storytelling web pages built with Flutter Web. And the thing is that like its overall product is basically Insta story that looks pretty cool but in a link form, which is nice. I like it. So Amster, it's pretty cool generally, and how it basically is it looks something like this. And at the same time, I guess from the looks of it, it looks pretty clean, looks pretty cool. So let me create a story. So I mean, I'm giving free publicity, but yeah, this is me just reviewing a Flutter Web ready production app, right? So if I were to click for Aladdin, and then let's look into the editor itself. So let's load it for a while, and it looks something like this. So honestly, it looks pretty nice. I guess the whole product itself that they want to showcase looks very nice, and I guess the GIF renders nicely. However, you could see that like honestly it's okay, it's not bad, but like it janks a lot if you were to move stuff here and there. Oops, what did I do? Oh shit. But it's okay. Oh no. Holy help. But it's okay. So that's the thing about, I guess, Flutter Web. Like not everything is available, and I think if I were to make this into like a JavaScript framework or library that has been done in JavaScript, then this will be less laggy, I would say. It wouldn't be so unlaggy, but yeah. Overall, if I were to, for example, click like left and right, like it renders very nicely, and then if I were to delete, then yeah, it actually performs its own like CRUD pretty okay. But if I were to go to the left tab over here, right, and if I were to click on stuff, yeah, it's pretty like, yeah. So I guess because it's using Flutter Web, and I would say like really Flutter Web is really not production ready yet, and I do believe that they're going to make it faster because of like stuff. Alright, so then if I were to, for example, edit the text, right? So I like it how they highlight the text with this blue field, which is translucent. But if I were to, for example, click on the R, you can see the cursor starts at February, and it's not exactly rendered like nicely, right? If I were to click it. So if I were to like, if I press, right, it takes a while for you to type stuff, which it's nitpicking, but I would say it adds up, and it might be like an annoying experience for someone who expect the text field to actually be the fastest thing to actually render inside a website. And at the same time, I want to point out of some rendering stuff which I've experienced myself when I create some Flutter Web projects, right? So you could see like these are different buttons that you can play around with, but you could see this border. You can see on the left of this curved container, there is some like pixelation, which is very, I would say, ugly. And then on the right, there's some missing pixels over here. So there is some things I guess the Flutter rendering still need to work on. But overall, I think like you have the necessary tools for you to build stuff here and there, but I wouldn't say it's lag free or jank free, you know. So there's a lot of things to be improved, but overall this is like, yeah, it's pretty good. I mean, that's about it. I will go for what the web users are really used to, and the thing is they're used to very fast animations, like for example like this, right? So you don't expect the text to be like, yeah. So for example, if I want to highlight all of this word, normally this will be like a text tag or a text widget, but then it is unhighlightable or unselectable, which is good and bad, but it doesn't really matter because sometimes users want to copy and paste certain stuff, right? So that's one thing I guess the user experience will not get used to when they are experienced with a Flutter Web project. So that's about it. In my summary, like Flutter Web is ever increasingly to have more features that should be available inside any other web framework out there, which is whether it's React, Angular, or Svelte or Vue. But in the end, we still have to do like a catch-up game. But we'll see how it goes. Maybe it will be the best framework, or it will still be a framework that's still ongoing in terms of like performance and whatnot. So that's about it. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you want more of this video, subscribe down below and comment down on a Flutter project, for example Amster, that's already production level, and let me review it. Stay safe and all the best. Bye bye.